So, in way of introduction, I'm Josh Marsden. I'm the Digital Solutions Manager and Partner here at AP Psychology and Consulting Services. So, my role predominantly focuses around the management of the psychosocial risk management platform that we have, TM Thrive, which helps organizations follow the risk management approach to addressing psychosocial risk. And leading today's session on tackling bullying, incivility, and aggression at work is Krisha Hunt, our Principal Consultant here at AP Psychology. Welcome, Krisha.
Thanks, Josh. So very excited to be spending the next little while with everybody at today's session on tackling bullying, incivility and aggression at work. As Josh said, I'm Krisha. I'm the Principal Consultant here at AP Psychology and Consulting Services, and I'm also a registered psychologist. So we know that this topic is something that is very close to a lot of people's hearts. We know that it's something that has really risen to the top of the agenda for lots of people. So whether you're in a people leader role, whether you're an HRBP in P&C, part of safety and wellbeing teams, this is something that's coming up time and time again, that people want to know how to tackle this and feel better equipped, essentially, to deal with it. But before we go too much further, I would like to express an acknowledgement of country. Acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. I also acknowledge their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to the lands, waters, seas, and skies, and communities across Australia.
Thank you for that acknowledgement, Krisha. Before we get fully underway, I just want to tick off a little bit of housekeeping. So we will be running a number of polls throughout the session as well. So they should just you should just see them pop up in the screen. Feel free to answer them as you go. And also there'll be a Q&A at the end there. So you should see either on your bottom taskbar or the top taskbar an option to add items into Q&A. So yeah, we'll address them towards the end of the session. Back to you, Krisha, and I'll go off camera.
Great, thanks so much, Josh. So yes, please do engage as much as you can in the webinar through the polls. It'd be great to see what everybody is facing into at the moment in relation to this topic. And in terms of what we're going to look at today, we're going to cover quite a wide range of information related to this topic. So we're going to start off by thinking about why this is on the agenda for so many people. Why does it seem to have come to the fore more recently? We know that inappropriate workplace behaviours, a psychosocial hazard in themselves, is absolutely intertwined with some of the other psychosocial hazards like high job demands, low levels of control, poor support, and so on. And so maybe it's not surprising that with the renewed attention now on psychosocial hazards and managing psychosocial hazards, that this has come into sharp focus. So bullying, harassment, and incivility in the workplace is a key psychosocial hazard. So we'll have a look at a bit what the stats are telling us, what the data is telling us. We'll also get a better understanding of what exactly is bullying, incivility, and aggression. So what does it look like? And just as importantly, what it isn't. And certainly that's something that we see come up in the conversations that we're having with our clients, and particularly people leaders that we're engaging with at the moment, is that line leaders are struggling a little bit on knowing how to manage performance issues without themselves being subsequently accused of bullying or harassment. So there's something that we see line leaders are nervous about at the moment, that they don't want to be put in a position where charges are sort of laid against them. And finally, most importantly, we'll look at what we can do to prevent it occurring in the first place, what we can do to protect individuals against it, and support individuals who might have been exposed to inappropriate workplace behaviours as well. And I can see there's a poll up already and people are starting to jump into that, thinking about how well equipped is your organisation right now, do you think, to identify and respond to inappropriate behaviours. So people sitting at the moment at around about that sort of more towards the top end of the scale, so feeling somewhat equipped. So hopefully by the end of this session, we'll have a bit of better sense of that as well. So let's have a look. Why do we need to pay attention to this? What's going on in our workplaces at the moment? What's the prevalence and what's the impact and the cost of inappropriate workplace behaviours? So the picture is quite confronting, actually. So as you can see there, 53% of Australian employees have experienced incivility, and we'll have a look at what exactly that means in a moment. And that's from the Workplace Health and Safety Report in 2024. So that's a recent stat. Also, 1 in 3, which is phenomenal, 1 in 3 Australian employees have experienced sexual harassment. And again, we'll dig down into that a little bit more shortly. And 1 in 10 of us, 1 in 10 of Australian employees have experienced workplace bullying. And that's taken from the Australian Bullying and Harassment the Safe Work Australia Bullying and Harassment in Australian Workforces report, which was back from 2014 to 2015, which is a while ago, but it is in line with a more recent APS employee census from the year before last, from 2023, which reported the prevalence of workplace bullying as being about 10.4%, so similar. So we're looking at about 10% of our workforces being exposed to bullying. So that's a fair proportion of the workforce being exposed to these inappropriate behaviours. And we know that there's also obviously an impact in terms of claims that are going up at the moment for psychological claims related to inappropriate workplace behaviour. So again, according to the Safe Work Australia report, nearly 44% of all serious mental health claims in the period 21 to 22 were due to inappropriate workplace behaviours. And in fact, the highest proportions were bullying and harassment, which sat at 27.5%, and exposure to occupational or workplace violence at 16.4%. So both those, bullying and harassment and workplace violence, or OVA, made up 44% of the mental health claims in 2021 to 2022. So clearly this is extremely prevalent, and we need to be looking at what we can do to reduce it. What's interesting as well about that is that that period, 2021 to 2022, was the first time that bullying and harassment, inappropriate workplace behaviours were the main cause of mental health stress claims. Prior to that, the decade prior to that, in fact, the main cause was workload. So that's really shifted. And we're still seeing a lot workload. Workload's probably second on the list now, but certainly work pressure has gone down the list, and inappropriate workplace behaviours has gone up the list in terms of what people are putting in compensation claims for. And as we all know, I'm sure on this call, that psychological claims typically cost 4 times more and result in more lost time from work compared to physical claims. And you can see there some of the average compensation claim payout amounts for work-related bullying. So that's sitting at 58,000, and occupational violence sitting at about 30,000 in terms of compensation rewards. And the lost time is huge as well. So 31.2 weeks for bullying and harassment. So people affected by that taking significant periods of time away from work. And similarly, occupational violence, 18.5 weeks. And that's compared to when we look at the sort of physical, the relevant physical stats there, physicals around about 15,500 on average per claim, and is around about 7 or 8 weeks time away from work. So again, you know, really quite compelling reasons why we need to look at what's going on and what we can do to reduce the impact and the presence of inappropriate workplace behaviour in the first place. So let's have a look at who it's affecting. So we know that inappropriate workplace behaviours can affect anybody and everybody in the workforce, but there's also research that's suggesting that there are certain groups that are a little bit more at risk of being exposed to these kinds of behaviours. So in terms of gender, first of all, women on the whole tend to fare less well than men in relation to workplace behaviours. And in fact, workers' comp claim data again showed that 31.1% of women with mental health stress claims had experienced work-related harassment or workplace bullying. And again, that was 2021 to 2022. And that's compared to 22.6% of men. So certainly we absolutely see that this is absolutely affecting men as well. Women do seem to have a slightly higher risk rate. Also, in terms of work-related sexual harassment, women are 2.5 times more likely than men to experience sexual harassment in the workplace. And we're looking at around about 300,000 women a year, again, in that period 21 to 22 from the ABS personal safety report, compared to about 127,000 men. So this is hundreds of thousands of people that are being affected by this every year. We also see that there are differences between industries and sectors as well. So again, the claims data shows that workers in healthcare and social assistance and education and training are more likely to have accepted claims for mental health conditions than workers in any other industry. And that's probably no surprise to a lot of you on the call today. Again, data from the People at Work survey showed that 1 in 3 people in these industries experienced workplace bullying in the last 6 months. And also 30% of occupational violence and aggression claims were from those industries. So from healthcare, social assistance, education and training made up 30% of all OVA claims. So certainly that's a high risk population. So certainly, again, lots of reasons for us to look at what we can do to prevent this happening in the first place, and also support where we can, where it's already occurred. It is interesting as well, it's worth noting that women are more likely to work in those industries as well. So you've kind of got an interaction or an intersection of those 2 risks as well. So women tend to work in, healthcare and support services more than men. In fact, the ABS census showed that 78% of workers were in the healthcare and social assistance sector, and 73% of workers were female in the education and training sector. So again, you've got that intersection, which was really putting women in that really high risk category. We also know that people in minority groups have a higher than average exposure to inappropriate workplace behaviours. So here we're talking about young workers, workers in minority groups because of their ethnicity or their religion or disability, gender, sexual preferences. We're also, though, talking about casual workers and people like apprentices and trainees, which again tends to intersect with young workers. But also injured employees and employees on return to work programs are more at risk of being exposed to inappropriate workplace behaviours. And again, particular industries tend to have higher representation of these groups as well. So think retail, hospitality, trades, etc. So it's really important to think about how all of these things interact and where your hotspots might be, depending on what industry you're working in. And of course, the impact of the inappropriate behaviours can be absolutely devastating to the person experiencing it and those witnessing it. And that ranges from things like reduced concentration and decision-making ability at work, right through to the other end of the scale where we're talking about diagnosable mental health conditions around anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts as well. So we know absolutely that people are dealing with the impacts of this from a workplace perspective, but also that obviously carries over into their personal home lives as well in terms of the symptoms and the impacts that they're managing. And not only obviously does it have an impact on the individuals, there's also an impact on the organisation as well. So again, we know that workplaces with poor cultures where bullying and harassment and inappropriate work behaviours are prevalent tend to have reduced productivity. There's increased turnover, increased absenteeism. There's also risks to reputation as well in terms of being an employer of choice, credibility of organisations, and also from an economic point of view, the bottom line as well. So all of those stats together highlight a significant and growing problem of workplace bullying and harassment and incivility in Australia, and it really emphasises the need for effective prevention and intervention strategies. So just looking at the poll that's coming through now as well, the question is, have you or someone you work with experienced workplace harassment in the last 6 months? And 54% are saying no, 43% are saying yes, with 3% at the moment saying prefer not to say. So not too big a difference between yes and no. It's good to see that no is higher on the poll today, which is great for all of us on the call today. but also worrying that 43% of you who've responded absolutely have experienced workplace harassment in the last 6 months, or know someone that has. So again, certainly backs up what we've just been seeing in all of those stats, doesn't it? Let's have a little look then at what bullying, harassment, incivility is, and as I said, what it isn't as well. So I'm sure most people on the call today are more than familiar with the definitions of bullying and harassment and incivility, but in the interests of having everyone on the same page, I will touch on the definitions and give some examples of what those behaviours look like. So Safe Work Australia defines bullying as repeated unreasonable behaviour directed at an employee or group of employees that creates a risk to health and safety. And examples of workplace bullying include repeated verbal abuse, for example, being sworn at or being threatened or insulted, abusive or offensive emails, threatening body language, undermining someone's work performance, and deliberately withholding work-related information or resources that might be necessary to complete a particular job or a task. It's also about the unequal or unreasonable application of work rules and or benefits to staff as well. And obviously, for a lot of those, that can be perpetrated by colleagues as well as leaders and managers. The key word in that definition, though, is repeated, the word repeated, as this is what differentiates it from harassment, which can be a one-off event and doesn't have to be repeated behaviour. So harassment's described as when someone is made to feel intimidated, insulted, or humiliated. So examples of harassment include unwelcome and offensive conduct that's based on race, colour, nationality, sex, religion, disability, age, all of those things that we talked about in relation to minority groups. And also those can include offensive or derogatory jokes, racial or ethnic slurs, and unwelcome comments about a person's religion. So anything that's kind of targeting somebody's attributes, essentially. Incivility, on the other hand, is defined as words or action that convey disrespect and usually occurs at a lower intensity compared to bullying and harassment. So it might be those sort of more offhand comments that have an ambiguous intent that can be sort of read a number of ways. So it's that kind of low intensity, but you know that something's not quite right and is a little bit off. And finally, sexual harassment, which of course is one form of harassment, is defined as any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. And there's heaps of resources out there, obviously, in terms of the specific definitions of that through Safe Work Australia, WorkSafe, and all of the regulators have clear definitions around what each of those behaviours look like. What we want to focus on as well here is, though, what it isn't. So this is what I was saying at the beginning of the webinar. Certainly people leaders are feeling uncertain about what they can do now in relation to reasonable action of managing performance. So people are feeling quite nervous about approaching staff, managing staff, particularly where there is underperformance, poor performance, and whether that's in terms of outputs, quality, or whether it is in relation to behavioural inappropriate behaviours that are happening. And there's certainly an increased fear from people leaders that if they do engage in performance management, that they themselves are going to come under attack for bullying and harassment claims. And it's really interesting because it is true that a manager exercising their legitimate authority at work might result in some discomfort for some workers, but that doesn't mean that it's bullying and harassment. In fact, managers and supervisors absolutely have the authority and, in fact, a duty to take appropriate, reasonable management actions. They do need to be able to direct and control the work and the way it's carried out. They need to respond to poor performance and take disciplinary action if needed. So all of those things we absolutely need to make sure are happening, that we have an effective workforce. And in fact, the Fair Work Act specifically states, and it uses these words, that reasonable management action is not bullying. So it might serve as some comfort to particularly people leaders out there that the question of whether or not management action is considered reasonable is determined by considering the actual management action itself and not the worker's perception of it. So I think that's something that is a big key in this, is that a worker may perceive that it's bullying and harassment. That does not make it so. Things that would be considered in terms of whether it's reasonable management or not, sorry, things that would be considered reasonable management are things like setting realistic goals, setting realistic performance targets, undertaking performance appraisals, having ongoing meetings to address underperformance, and disciplining people for misconduct. So there's lots of things that people might need to be having conversations with their teams about. And things like modifying duties or transferring somebody from one team to another or from one task area to another is completely acceptable as well. Similarly, deciding not to promote someone if you've had a fair and transparent selection process, also not bullying or harassment. It's worth noting, I think, here that good people management means taking a fair and equitable approach and taking a humanistic or people-first approach. And if that's done well, it really very much reduces the likelihood and possibility of a bullying or harassment claim. So we will go into a little bit more of the, well, how do we do that in a moment? But it's really about taking that said people-first approach, having fair, equitable processes, transparent processes, and also empowering individuals and leaders to undertake those elements of the role that they need to in terms of performance management. Similarly, differences of opinion and disagreements are generally not workplace bullying or harassment. And people can have differences and disagreements in the workplace without engaging in repeated unreasonable behavior. So we can encourage people to have robust discussions, to have differences of opinion, and do that in a respectful way. The only thing that we need to be careful of there is that in some instances, conflict, which is actually, in fact, a normal part of the human experience, and particularly at work as well. But conflict that's not managed can escalate to the point where it becomes workplace bullying. So it's really important that we can keep an eye on that and we can intervene where necessary around that as well. But it's not about eradicating conflict. It's not about eradicating differences of opinion and getting everybody to have agreement. It's about how we go about managing those interactions and those disagreements and differences of opinion. So having looked at what it is, let's have a little bit of a look as well at why it happens. What are the drivers of inappropriate workplace behaviours? So we've already mentioned that the existence of other psychosocial hazards in the workplaces are likely to increase the probability of poor workplace behaviour occurring. So you can see on the left-hand side there, it's just some of the psychosocial hazards that can exist in any workplace. Those are outlined again by Comcare, Safe Work, in the codes of practice. And it stands to reason, if we think about it, I'm sure we've all experienced this as well, that if we've got a very high workload, we're working really long hours, we may be feeling not so supported by our managers, maybe our colleagues aren't around for us at the moment, and maybe there's a generally poor culture where people don't trust each other. If we've got all of those things happening, it's not likely to put us in the best position to be the best version of ourselves. And if we add things like poorly managed change, job insecurity, you really have got a recipe for people not being their best selves. So it's really about the conditions that people work in that can impact on how they respond and how they interact in the environment. We know that when we're stressed, and we know that psych hazards can lead to stress, we know that when we're stressed, we're not operating at our optimum, and we're likely or potentially likely to display some inappropriate or suboptimal behaviours. We also know that there's other characteristics of a workplace that contribute to poor workplace behaviours. That's the things that you can see listed on the right-hand side there. So things like power imbalances, gender inequality, intersectionality, and other workforce characteristics. So power imbalance, for example, is where someone who holds power might gain a sense of entitlement, and others might start to be fearful of challenging or speaking out against that power. So it links a little to Amy Edmondson's definition of personal psychological safety. So feeling safe to speak up and feeling safe to challenge, raise ideas, concerns, etc. Gender inequality obviously relates to unequal distribution of resources or opportunity, or the level of value afforded to people because of their gender. So examples of workplaces often influenced by gender inequality include workplaces where leadership positions are dominated by men. And I think that's still quite a lot of workplaces, unfortunately. Or where there's a lack of access to appropriate facilities for women and gender diverse workers. or where there's an expectation that workers will perform certain roles or jobs or duties because of their gender. So it's good for organisations to reflect on that and think, where are we at in terms of our gender equality? Intersectionality that's up there is all about what I was mentioning before. So it's the overlapping forms of discrimination that might happen if people are in several minority groups. So, for example, there might be Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander with a disability who's also part of the LGBTQI community. And workers who are belonging to more than one minority group are at higher risk of experiencing inappropriate workplace behaviours. So again, it's about looking at what is the context of our work, what kind of sector industry are we in, what kind of workers do we tend to attract in terms of the profile of those workers, and are they more likely then to be exposed to this kind of behaviour? Do we need to take special care in our particular workplace? Other workplace specific factors which can increase the likelihood of poor workplace behaviours is also, again, linked to the culture a little bit, but is more around kind of, I guess, the philosophy of what's important and values in the workplace as well. So things like a customer is always right mentality, or profit first mentality, and that's kind of at the expense, those two, being at the expense of workforce well-being. So of course, lots of organisations do exist to make a profit, but it's about how we go about that as well as the end outcome. So lots of different things to consider when you're thinking about what might be impacting on workplace behaviour. And what are the things that are at the moment maybe more negative and need a little bit of attention, but also reflect on the things that are working. So have you got the converse of some of those things that are listed up there? Have you got great reward and recognition? Have you got great support? All of those things which will help to minimise and in cases eradicate poor workplace behaviours. So then moving more towards solution now a little bit, we've looked at the problem and where we're at with that. But let's look now at sort of roles and responsibilities. So who has the responsibility and accountability to manage all of this and ensure that the drivers of poor workplace behaviours are eliminated or minimised? Like any other psychosocial hazard, responsibility lies at several levels. So it lies at the organisation level, the people leader level, and at the individual level. And in fact, recent legislation and regulation updates in psychosocial hazard management codes of practices absolutely put an emphasis on different layers of the organisation, or different levels of the organisation, and proactivity around managing psychosocial hazards as well. And obviously as well, more recently, we've had the positive duty under the Sex Discrimination Act has put a much bigger emphasis on that proactivity as well. So just looking at the poll that's coming through now as well. So the question is, what barriers prevent effective handling of workplace bullying and aggression in your organisation? And there's a few different things that can impact on that. So there's lack of awareness, the leadership support, or lack of capability in leadership and in individuals, or unclear policies and procedures. And one that's coming out just a little bit ahead of the other two at the moment, it's changing as I speak, leadership support at 30%, and lack of capability and lack of awareness at 29% each as well. So it's obvious there from that, again, that we need to put certain focus on making sure that we've got leadership support, that we've got an awareness around this, and we've actually done the things that we need to do to support capability. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail now. So from an organisational point of view, a workplace is much better set up to deal with psychosocial hazards, and not even just bullying, harassment, incivility and aggression, any psychosocial hazard, when there's a good structural foundation. And what I mean by that is having the right systems, policies, procedures, etc., that support positive workplace relations and respectful behaviours. So it is things like having your anti-bullying policies, your codes of conduct, but also having a trauma-informed approach when you're responding to particular events or situations. It's also having things like clear grievance and complaints procedures and registers, and clear and accessible reporting lines as well. So do people know what to do, like where are the avenues that they need to take this? Is that accessible? Do they is that clear from their perspective about what the next steps are if they have witnessed or been the recipient of inappropriate workplace behavior? We also, from an organizational point of view, absolutely need to make sure that our staff are skilled to deal with those types of complaints and grievances and this inappropriate workplace behavior. So it's not just HRBPs, it's not just HR or IR, it's all of our people leaders and all of our staff need to know how to prevent and respond to inappropriate workplace behavior. So that's an organizational responsibility to provide that training and that education to the workforce. It's also really helpful for organizations to take a holistic approach and look at inappropriate behaviors being just one of those psychosocial hazards and identifying what the other psychosocial hazards might be. So understanding what might be prevalent in your organization and putting in place that eliminate or minimize the impact of the other psychosocial hazards is likely to have a flow-on effect to minimizing your inappropriate workplace behavior. So as we were saying before, if you've got high workloads, poor support, lack of trust, poor role clarity, all of those things, they themselves actually are impacting factors and contributing factors to inappropriate workplace behavior. So actually by looking at the cause, looking at the source, you can start to shift the dial on those behaviors. From a leader point of view, it's really important that there's leadership awareness and leadership buy-in. So certainly having senior management commitment to this as an agenda and a priority item is absolutely critical. But also they need to be able to role model what we're expecting as well. So they need to be able to identify and prevent and respond to inappropriate workplace behaviors as well. And understand what that looks like. So leading by example is not just about demonstrating appropriate workplace behavior yourself, it is also about understanding how to identify, prevent, and support when instances have occurred. It's about really, I guess, sending a clear message to employees that the organization's serious about preventing workplace bullying and contributing to a positive workplace culture. And people leaders need to be able to execute on the policies and the procedures that are in that foundation from the organizational point of view. So to do that, we do need to develop their skills in doing that. It's not the case that necessarily every single people leader is going to have those skills and capabilities naturally. Certainly in more technical environments, for example, leaders might be promoted to a leadership position off the back of being great from a technical perspective. So we really need to make sure we're looking at what is required of our leaders, our people leaders, in managing the workforce, and in particular, what's needed from managing workplace behaviors point of view. Do they have the skills, the knowledge, the education, the capability, the capacity as well to deal with all of this? So we absolutely need to make sure that we provide them with that support. So knowing how to intervene, they need to have those skills and capabilities to be proactive. And that, as I said, links back to that holistic approach we're just talking about. From an individual point of view, it's important to encourage employees to report instances of inappropriate workplace behavior. And one of the ways that we can do that is the way that employees are going to feel more supported in doing that and more likely to report is if they've got confidence that the workplace in the workplace procedures and that something's actually going to be done about it. And that processes are used consistently and applied consistently as well. So if the workforce believes that the policy is useless, no action is ever taken, or the processes are useless, they're less likely to report. If they don't see any change as a result of reporting, and or if that reporting itself is difficult to access, traumatic in itself in terms of reporting, much less likely to report. So encouraging employees to report inappropriate behavior helps the organization to take action to address the issues early on, and also assess if your prevention measures are working. And providing prompt assistance as well. But we need to make sure that it links back again to those foundations that I was talking about at an organizational level. Are the right systems in place? Are the right processes in place? Is the right capability there to navigate those processes as well? So think of this really as an ecosystem to help your people thrive, looking at it from an organizational perspective, a leader perspective, and an individual perspective. And certainly we worked recently with a client in the healthcare sector who were undertaking a bullying and harassment project. They'd identified that there was some bullying and harassment in some locations. And so we were working with them to understand what that looked like, and also what could be done differently. So in relation to what they did and how this kind of demonstrated across the organization leader and individual levels, part of our role in terms of consulting with them and providing solutions to them was to review their bullying and harassment policies and procedures, to review and update their toolkit that was associated with that policy and procedure. So they're really sort of starting at that organizational level. Have we got the right foundations in place? We then move to more of the training and the awareness raising. So specifically around senior leaders, we're targeted first to understand what was going on, but also understand what we're asking of the organization, what we're asking of the people reporting into them as well. So we wanted to work with the client to create that sort of top-down but holistic approach to improving workplace behavior. And at the more individual level, there was a rollout of awareness training across the organization. And in between that as well, we actually did some training specifically for HR and IR people, so people who have specific roles and responsibilities in relation to this stuff as well. And what that did really was obviously create a better foundation for people to be operating from, built awareness of expectations of behavior, built capability in identifying and responding to inappropriate behavior. And it created that awareness of that particular organization's specific policies, procedures, and resources available to people as well. So they really took that kind of three-level approach. And what resulted was greater consistency of understanding of the approach, and better ability, better capability to identify and respond to inappropriate behaviors. So that started to move into a little bit the what can we do, what can be done. So roles and responsibilities form part of that. But looking at this slide, again, taking that sort of level approach, we've got the three levels again of organization, leader, and individual, but also on the left-hand side here now, we're introducing the prevention, protection, and support framework. So a really robust approach to tackling behavior, inappropriate behavior in the workplace would contain all three elements, or all six elements: organization, leader, individual, and also at the prevention, protection, and support levels. So prevention is, of course, more primary interventions. So things that are set up to stop inappropriate behavior before it occurs. Interventions that focus around protection are really about activities that your organization can do that help people to manage their particular experiences or situations that they're in. And also enhance those people's strength, capitalize on their strengths to deal with it, and encourage that really early help-seeking behavior as well. Support interventions are more at the tail end, so more tertiary, and it's more post after the fact when something has actually happened. So what can we do to support people if they have been witness to or experienced inappropriate workplace behavior? So let's have a little bit of a look at those in a bit more detail. Now you can see up there is a few dot points on what we can do. Certainly, of course, that's absolutely nowhere near an exhaustive list. But what we wanted to do today was just give a little bit of a flavor of some of the things that you can put into place. So let's have a look at prevention to start with. So at the organization level, as we've been talking about, make sure that you develop and implement clear policies, and ideally do that in consultation with your workforce as well. That's in line with the regulations and the code of practice of managing psychosocial hazards as well, making sure that you get input from your workforce about how the workplace is going to handle these issues and how they're going to deal with these issues. Make sure that your procedures suit your business as well, so the size and the structure of your business, so that it allows easy communication, easy reporting, those kinds of things. Making it accessible, so providing employees and managers with contact details of who the support people are, and where to go in terms of reporting, for example. And ideally, again, include this in kind of induction processes so that everybody is mandatory required to actually undertake this kind of awareness and understand the policies and procedures as soon as they come into the organization. Another preventative mechanism that can be put in place at an organizational level is that training. We've talked about this. I was talking about that in the last couple of slides. So providing that information and training on what is appropriate workplace behavior in the first place, but also what are our procedures, our policies, where do you go to report, who's there to support you. Ideally, training should really include how to identify inappropriate behavior and what employees should do if they witness inappropriate behavior, and obviously how to report it as well. You might also need to have additional training for employees who've got a role or responsibility in this area. So I was saying before, HR, IR, maybe HSRs as well. And I think what's important when you're thinking about training is to consider the quality of that training. So that it could cover a range of different topics, making sure that it is fit for purpose, but it might include things like effective communication, managing difficult conversations, providing constructive feedback, conflict management skills, etc. So really choosing training that helps you achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. At a leader level, obviously we want, as I've said, leaders to role model appropriate workplace behavior. And so we need to give them training to do that. It's also worth thinking about leadership style. We know that autocratic management styles, or at the other end, laissez-faire management styles, tend to increase the likelihood of inappropriate behavior. So again, have leaders got training support on management style, leadership styles? We know that leaders who adopt a more participative management style as part of a culture that emphasizes communication, support, and mutual respect are going to engender a more positive culture. Also, though, reward and recognize your leaders who do role model safe, respectful, inclusive behaviors. Think about how you're assessing and rewarding your leaders. Are you focusing mainly on rewarding leaders that achieve results, or are you focusing as well on how they achieve those results? So are they doing that in an inclusive and respectful way? And of course, asking leaders to promote policies in appropriate settings as well, such as team meetings, for example. At the individual level, we, of course, want individuals to work in line with the codes of conduct. We want to make sure that they themselves are not engaging in any inappropriate workplace behavior. And of course, part of that is making sure what the workforce know what the expectations and standards are. So that's the prevention level. Moving on to protection, and again, looking at the organization level. Providing transparent reporting is a really great way to build trust in processes and procedures. So if you can show your commitment to managing the risk of inappropriate behavior by highlighting what you've done or what you will do, that will really help to generate confidence that the organization's serious about preventing inappropriate behavior. So share updates on initiatives that you're taking. Monitor also your health of your workforce. So again, do that in consultation with your workforce and your HSRs. Look to see if there are signs of inappropriate behavior happening, or if there's an increased risk of inappropriate behavior happening. And then you can take steps, obviously, to implement the appropriate controls. And there's lots of checklists out there and resources around looking at what the state of inappropriate behavior is. So, people like Safe Work Australia, again, and WorkSafe Victoria, for example, have inappropriate behavior checklists. From a leader perspective, early intervention and acting promptly are absolutely critical. Again, as with most workplace psychosocial hazards, the earlier we intervene, the better the outcome is likely to be. And what we mean by early intervention in this context, in particular in terms of inappropriate workplace behaviours, is a way of solving an issue without a formal report or investigation. So early intervention might be possible through an individual self-managing the situation or seeking help from somebody internally to raise an issue like a manager. And again, training is a really important role in that, making sure that leaders know what they're looking out for and what those appropriate behaviours look like and know what to do in response to that. But where we can manage that and get a resolution before it gets to a formal complaint investigation, again, usually better outcomes for everyone involved. So I mentioned self-management, and empowering individuals at this individual level to self-manage is an option to initially address workplace inappropriate behaviour, but really that should only take place if the individual who experiences that behavior is confident and safe to do so. So that obviously requires a level of skill and capability, but also leadership support and solid organizational foundations which support safe self-management as well. So again, the absolute interaction of the ecosystem. We also want to encourage employees to report and ensuring confidentiality will increase the likelihood of people reporting. And taking a trauma-informed approach as well. So making sure that we are, again, putting people first, and we are taking a person-centered approach. So encouraging and empowering individuals to manage situations themselves, but report what they're experiencing and what they have maybe seen and witnessed too. And then finally, support. So this is where perhaps instances have already occurred and incidents have already occurred. So again, at an organizational level, providing the clear avenues and pathways for support and reporting. So are people aware of what support services are, like your EAP? There might also be specific individuals within the organization or teams within the organization to support in these specific circumstances as well. Leaders, again, taking that people-centered, trauma-informed approach. And actually supporting all parties as well. I think there can be a bit of a tendency to make sure that we're supporting the person who is saying that they have been the recipient of inappropriate workplace behaviour. We've actually got a responsibility to support the person who is accused of doing that as well, and do that in a fair and neutral way. So again, giving them the same access to the right kinds of supports within your organisation. And again, at an individual level, we want obviously to make sure that people do have that support, whether that comes from internally, things like your EAP, or whether that comes externally from lots of those resources and agencies that are out there that specialise in this particular area as well. So making sure that we absolutely are giving individuals the knowledge and understanding for them to do that. So in terms of taking a bit of a step back, we've kind of gone into the detail there of what we can do at an organizational leader and individual level. But taking a bit of a sort of step back and kind of looking at, how do we assess what's going on in our organization? How do we kind of take that temperature check? How do we kind of understand what's going on off, particularly at the front line? So how do you identify if issues are present? And there's three main ways that we can do this. And again, this actually applies to all psychosocial hazards, but again, specifically as well for identifying inappropriate workplace behavior. So one of the key ways that we can find out what's going on is reviewing our data. So it's things like our absenteeism rates, our claims data, our complaints and grievances registers, employee engagement surveys. What is the data telling you? Are you seeing a rise in absenteeism? Are you seeing a rise in claims? That's going to give you that information to say, look, I think we potentially have a problem here that we need to look into. So reviewing the data that you've got, gathering that data if you don't have the data in the first place as well. And getting specific information about bullying and harassment. No, lots of employee engagement surveys do that. But interestingly, the work that we've done with clients, we use a specific tool called the Workplace Psychological Safety Index. And that has got, again, specific questions around psychosocial hazards, including bullying and harassment. And what we found is that being a third party, people are more likely to report bullying and harassment in that mechanism rather than internal employee engagement surveys. So it certainly can be somewhat of a revelation to some organisations, the extent to which bullying and harassment might be prevalent in their organisations when we look at that data for them. But getting that data, obviously, is the first point to be able to understand if there's an issue that needs to be dealt with and what those hotspots are as well. Are there particular teams that are more exposed, for example, client-facing teams or people that work with individuals who are in crisis? There's going to be a different range of profiles of individuals who are exposed to this kind of risk within any business. Consulting and observing as well are the other two main mechanisms to understand what's going on in your organisation. So consulting with staff and observing staff behaviours. So consultation can occur in lots of different formats, and surveys is certainly one of those. So, again, your employee engagement surveys or specific surveys to get those responses from individuals, but also things like focus groups, things like your normal weekly team meetings, your normal one-on-ones, consulting and talking to your staff, talking to your workforce to understand what's going on. It's simply asking, what's going on for you? Tell me what's working, what's not working, what could we do to change things, what could we do to make things better? So consulting, secondly, and observation finally as well. So again, equipping particularly people leaders to observe if there's changes in behavior of people within the team. Are there, again, increased absenteeism rates for people that are usually very reliable, for example? Are you seeing that there is starting to be a lack of trust within the team dynamic, that that dynamic is shifting a little bit? What is the observation telling you? So there's lots of data points that you can pick on that give you the information that there may be an issue there. So review the data and or gather the data to start with if you haven't got it. Consult with your organization, the people in your organization, and observe, get team leaders to be observing what's going on in their teams and feeding that information back up. So we're coming towards the end of this afternoon's webinar. Thank you so much for your interaction on the polls so far. In terms of key takeaways, what I'd suggest is that we do think about things in that organization, leader, and individual approach. So look at what the foundations are that you've got in place at an organizational level. Do you know what those policies are? Have they been reviewed recently? Are they fit for purpose? Has the organization, has the workforce been consulted when those foundations are being built, when those policies and procedures are being developed? So absolutely key to get that groundwork in place and get that sort of solid foundation, essentially, from which other things absolutely rely on and interact with. From a leader perspective, I think the absolute key take-out message from today is grow capability. So don't assume that leaders have the knowledge, have the skills, have the capability to be able to deal with inappropriate workplace behavior. Make sure that we are delivering supportive education, training, skills development to our leaders that is absolutely focused on how to identify inappropriate workplace behaviors, what to do, and not just generally what to do specifically in your organization, and making sure that leaders are supported by their own leaders in that as well. So growing leader capability is so important. We know that leaders have such a massive impact in terms of team culture, in terms of things like productivity, engagement, all those things. Leaders are absolutely where the rubber hits the road, essentially, in terms of how workplaces operate and what the culture's like. From an individual perspective, certainly the recommendation is to empower individuals to either, for example, self-manage. So give them, again, the skills, the knowledge, the capability to navigate situations, empower them to report when things are happening. So again, going back to those foundations again, clear, accessible reporting mechanisms and varied reporting mechanisms as well, actually. So there's a lot of research that shows that the more people are more likely to report if there are a number of different avenues to report, and demonstrating that the organization takes that seriously, that there is action when reports are made, and that there are clear outcomes as well. Again, sort of sharing that information. So three key things: build your foundations, grow your leadership capability, and empower your individuals across the whole workforce. There are, as I've been mentioning along the way, tons of support and resources out there. Websites, documentation from organisations like Respect at Work, which is focused around the sexual harassment piece. Beyond Blue, obviously, many people will be familiar with that. Lots of resources around respectful workplace behaviours. So it's not just a counselling line. There is lots of information on their website that's specifically around workplace and how to manage workplace behaviours. 1-800-RESPECT, of course, in terms of support services for those who have been affected. And again, regulations from government organisations like the Fair Work Ombudsman, Fair Work Commission, etc. So there is a ton of information out there. As I said, there's lots of guides, there's lots of tick box exercises that you can engage in to understand what the current situation might be in your particular workplace. So I'd encourage you to look into some of those if you are not already familiar. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Krisha. Great presentation, and yeah, it's always good listening to what you know in this space, and I guess the things that jump out to me and kind of echoes across a lot of the psychosocial risk factors is it's that leadership, and I always think about leadership at two levels. So it's getting that buy-in from the senior leaders inside the organization. Sometimes they need a little convincing. They need some data points. They need some facts because the space might be, it wasn't around when they were moving up through the ranks of an organization.
Yeah,
So they do need proof points from that. And then as the people leaders, at the end of the day, they have the most human interactions with people inside the organization. So if they don't have the confidence or skills to have good conversations with their people, identify signs and symptoms, then the best policies and process in the world
exactly.
can't do too much.
Yeah.
So thank you, Krisha. Thanks everybody for joining in. Just a quick recap of what's next. So we can only get so much in an hour session. So we will actually be running a masterclass, Advanced Strategies to Drive Change Against Workplace Bullying and Aggression, led by Dr. Donnie Chaco, a lead senior facilitator here at AP Psychology. That'll be the 8th of April. And that's going to be a far more comprehensive session where we're going to focus on digging into what are the problems that people are experiencing. So it is capped at a 20-person capacity so that we do give everyone in the room a chance to share their experiences and we can follow a proven framework to help work through some of those problems as well. We will send a follow-up email post-session, which will provide more details into this upcoming workshop as well. I just wanted to give you the heads up. For the Q&A, we had some great questions come through. There were some quite technical questions come through as well around workers' comp and different schemes. So we will loop back probably in the follow-up email with those ones, just because we want to make sure that we provide accurate information back as well. But one I'm looking at now, Krisha, with a couple of minutes remaining, would be good to answer is, what are some strategies managers can use to address bullying locally without needing to escalate through the formal process?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So that sort of links to what I was talking about before in terms of early intervention and undertaking processes or actions that de-escalate rather than escalate or lead to formal complaints and formal investigations. So certainly things like having private conversations with the individuals involved, focusing on the behaviours rather than what the accusations are, setting clear expectations for future conduct as well, but also making sure that you do things like document the conversations and document the various points of action that each of the parties is taking. If the behavior does continue, so if that doesn't work, so having a conversation with people, resetting the kind of expectations, then it's probably then time to involve HR, IR, or relevant people from within your specialist teams as well. And that's when it might go to more disciplinary level and taking disciplinary action. So at that point, leaders absolutely need to get support from inside their organizations and not try and do all that on their own.
Thank you, Krisha. So as mentioned, we'll do a follow-up recap email after this, probably in the next 1 to 2 days, and that'll also include that follow-up session. If you you believe you have a problem or not sure if you have a problem around bullying and harassment inside your organization, feel free to reach out and contact us. We're happy to have a conversation about what's going on, and we've got different tools, resources, programs to assist with that as well. Otherwise, thanks everybody for joining in. Once again, thanks, Krisha, for delivering a great session, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks, Josh.